Last week, the Wall Street Journal's Drew Hinshaw saw his friend Evan for the first time since March. It was only on video, and Evan was in a glass box, pacing, because the Russian government has detained him.
It's the first glimpse of Evan Gershkovich for weeks. The U.S. reporter...
By now, you've probably heard Evan Gershkovich's name. The journalist is accused of espionage. He faces 20 years in prison. The Moscow courthouse, where he appeared, it was packed.
A few journalists call out their support. Hold strong, one shouts. Everyone sends you a big hello, the voice says. Тебя от всех привет большой. Before being hustled away.
Drew has been assigned to cover his friend's story for the publication they both work for. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Yeah, what a weird time for you.
Totally. It is weird. It's surreal. It is, this is the first time Russia has brought a spy case against an overseas reporter since the Cold War. And
as Evan's colleague and friend, I assume you would say there's no truth to these allegations.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And not just me, by the way. I mean, that's what the Wall Street Journal says. That's what his friends and family says. And the State Department has declared him a wrongfully detained American and said that these charges are bogus. So that's coming from a lot of different corners.
Do you think the truth matters here?
What I can say is that in the Russian system, espionage trials are conducted in secret, and they almost always end in a conviction.
The uncanny thing about watching Evan in court, for Drew, was seeing these little flashes of the reporter he's so familiar with. His arms were folded in front of him, as if he couldn't quite believe where he'd found himself.
He's someone who lives and breathes this job. And what stood out to me is I could see the smile on his face when he saw his colleagues in that room. Those people covering him. For another American detained in Russia, that probably would have been very discombobulating. Here's these journalists with their cameras pointed at you. For Evan, these are his colleagues, and beyond colleagues, they're his friends.
Drew says it's not that Evan didn't know his work was risky. He did.
I mean, he once tweeted something that I think summed it up. He once tweeted, "Reporting in Russia is now also a regular practice of watching people you know get locked away for years." And Evan was doing the honorable thing, the right thing, and trying to report that and understand what was happening in Russia. And I think this is among other things, really indicative of just where the U.S.-Russia relationship is at the moment. And it's about the right for fair and accurate and balanced reporting.
It sounds like you'd say there's the U.S.-Russia relationship before this detention and after it. Like it's sort of a line in the sand.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting thought. It's definitely, for a lot of Western news agencies, it certainly is. A lot of, Western news outlets that posted reporters to Moscow under Joseph Stalin have determined that under President Vladimir Putin, Russia is just too dangerous for journalism.
Today on the show, how Evan Gershkovich found himself in the middle of the fight over press freedom in Russia. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around. This episode is brought to you by Saks.com. Saks.com editors are always tracking the top styles that are trending right now. Tailored blazers and midi dresses are selling out at Saks.com, especially from brands like Veronica Beard and The Row. And Saks.com editors are seeing Loewe's oversized tote on the streets of New York, Milan, and Paris. If you want your own free personalized trend recommendations, Saks.com stylists can do that and more. Plus, there's free shipping and returns all the time at Saks.com.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Whether you're driving, cooking, or doing laundry, Progressive knows the podcasts you listen to go best when they're bundled with another activity, much like how their Progressive home and auto policies go best when they're bundled. Having these two policies together makes taking care of your insurance easier and could help you save too. Customers who save by switching their home and car insurance to Progressive save nearly $800 on average. That's a whole lot of savings and protection for your favorite podcast listening activities, like going on a road trip, cooking dinner, and even hitting the gym. Yep, your home and your car are even easier to protect when you bundle your insurance together. Find your perfect combo. Get a home and car insurance quote at Progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $793 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary.
How did you first meet Evan?
So he joined the journal about a year ago, and he'd been living and working in Russia for about 6 years.
Were you there too, or were you just a European correspondent, so you knew?
So I cover Central and Eastern Europe, which is so interesting because I was on the other side of this, really very serious political divide between Russia on the east and then, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, countries that just really, frankly, would love to have a, 2-mile high wall between them and this country.
So did you reach out to him on Slack the first day, hey, from across the way?
Well, Evan and I, we met in London. And I mean, we chatted for hours. Several times I've kind of closed out the bar with him, not because the bar was interesting, but because because his reporting is interesting. And yeah, so he's my experience of him was he's really energetic and enthusiastic and just has this sort of buoyant energy about him. When he goes to press conferences in Russia, he's kind of known for addressing politicians in informal Russian, guys who are used to be called, very formally and, in this serious kind of, bureaucratic language. And he rocks up in New Balance sneakers and an old gray sweater and addresses them in the kind of informal Russian that he uses with his family. It's off-putting and charming and also just kind of, it really has worked for him in terms of being someone that can understand the country that he's in somehow.
How much do you know about Evan's personal story? How he came to be a journalist and his parents' immigration to the U.S.? Because they came from Russia, right?
That's right. Well, his parents have their own very interesting story. They don't like to be called survivors because they will tell you that they found this optimism in America when they left the Soviet Union and they took it on. But their parents have really their life kind of traces this tragedy of both Russia and Ukraine.
They're Jewish, right?
They're Jewish, yeah. And his grandmother survived the Holocaust. She was a nurse in a Polish military hospital at the end of the war. She treated some of these patients coming in from Auschwitz. And wow. These were patients who couldn't eat very much. If they had to fight the kind of human urge to eat because if they ate too much, their bodies couldn't handle it. And when she would recall that story, she would weep.
His mother has told the story about how her family would put blankets over the windows when they lit candles for the Sabbath. That's
right. She was afraid as a teenager. She was afraid to go into a synagogue because they were afraid that if you did, you would be photographed and, the Secret Service would take note of you.
It's interesting that they raised Evan with this desire to go back to Russia.
They tell this story that they took him back to Russia on a visit, I think in the 90s, and they went to the very synagogue that I just mentioned, and they went to a museum about Jewish life. And it was they said to him afterwards, now I think you can understand us. Because it was this moment when, it's hard to imagine as a boy growing up in New Jersey, this kind of experience. They left in the 70s when there were rumors going about that Soviet Jews were about to be deported to Siberia. For Evan's mother, her mother had survived this. I mean, that you can imagine just how important it was for them to get out and then to make their way to the U.S.
So why was returning to Russia a goal for Evan?
So I've been kind of talking to his colleagues and friends, and there's an interesting person in this who is a role model for I think a lot of people of me and Evan, a generation of foreign correspondents, and And that's like Anthony Bourdain. He loved Anthony Bourdain. When he worked in kitchens in New York City, he was a line cook.
Yeah, he did that while he was working for the New York Times, right?
That's right. And he would leave work and go to a club or a bar or something with friends, and he would have 7 knives, so, 7 kitchen knives to be clear, like on his person, because he loved cooking. And everybody who you talked about, Evan, says he's an amazing chef. He absolutely loves food, and like he has that Anthony Bourdain spirit of like, I want to go and understand the other parts of the world. And, okay, so he was working at the New York Times, which for a lot of people, at that point would be a dream job, right? I mean, he was a news assistant, but, you work your way up. But someone said to him, like, look, you've got Russian language skills. You understand the country on some level because of your parents. You should go back and freelance, which for a lot of people would be a little bit intimidating, Where do you start? How do you begin? And he did it. He made the leap. And I think he was actually very successful relatively quickly.
Evan joined the Journal just weeks before Russia invaded Ukraine. Can you describe that time?
Yeah, absolutely. So when Evan joined in January and February, the prediction coming out of the Pentagon was that this would be a very kind of swift victory for Russia. There was not just in the Pentagon, there was a fatalism across Europe.
Yeah, the thought was just like tanks rolling into Kyiv. That's
right. And one of his first stories was from the border of Belarus, where he just watched these, a string of Russian military ambulances with their windows blocked with gray shades pulling up to a main hospital, just across the border, basically bringing in casualties from the front. And I remember reading it and thinking one of the first signs that, this is actually not, for Russia, this is actually not looking very good for them, is it? This kind of swift march into Kyiv wasn't at all panning out.
Evan left Russia soon after the invasion, along with many members of the Western press. But he still wanted to understand how regular Russian citizens were making sense of their sanctioned existence. So he decided to go back. He wrote stories only someone on the ground could, like this detailed report on the return of clubbing and jazz festivals among Moscow's young people. They were dancing and drinking as the war raged on. But even as Muscovites seemed to ignore the largest ground invasion in Europe since World War II, the city was becoming more hostile to Westerners like Evan.
He kind of liked to go to the sauna and chat there. And he goes to the sauna near the end of 2022, and another bather kind of heard him speaking in English and basically, told him with some pretty heavy and awful expletives to stop speaking English. And, he thought for a minute and then just sort of shot back, Russia is a multilingual country. And the guy paused for a second. Then he said back, but English isn't one of them.
Drew told me why, despite this aggression, this anxiety, Evan still wanted to report on Russia, from Russia.
It's because of Evan and like you said, fairly small number of reporters that we know what's going on in this part of the world.
What kind of precautions did he have to take?
He reported some strange incidents. One incident, he was followed by several Russian security officers, some of whom recorded his movements with a camera. He assumed his phone was monitored. And there was another trip to the western region of Pskov where he was sort of followed and filmed by unidentified men. So I think you can, derive from that, that was there in the atmosphere.
After the break, Evan's damning reporting on Putin and the harrowing Russian prison he's now being held in. I know you worked with Evan on this extensive piece about Vladimir Putin back in December. I wonder if we can talk about that experience and the experience of working closely with him and also reporting on something that certainly is not going to make his life easier as a correspondent inside Russia.
So towards the end of last year, it's pretty clear that the Journal owed its readers some sort of profile of who Putin has become and where his head is at. And not only us. The New York Times on the same time did a profile of Putin. And I mean, they had quite literally 25 reporters working on it. And I know that number because Evan counted so-and-so contributed to this, so-and-so contributed to this, so-and-so contributed to this. We had Evan. And I have to say, Evan held his own. He evened the score. I think for being one reporter up against, a whole army of, competing journalists, Evan was able to, sort of build a profile that showed the president was sort of isolated and surrounded by kind of a handful of hardline advisors who were telling him things were going better than they really were.
Yeah. How did you find out that Evan had been arrested?
I was eating dinner with a fellow reporter who works closely with Evan, as do I, but, he had been kind of in that contact with him early that day. And when he had texted him back, he had texted him that morning and said, hey, good luck today, because he knew he was out, reporting. And Evan had texted back, thanks, I'll let you know how it goes. And when he didn't respond to like a later text, my colleague I was meeting for dinner got a bit nervous and worried, as understandably so. So the newsroom kind of scrambled to, reach people in Yekaterinburg, where he had been. And what kind of, we didn't know. We're sort of sitting there trying to figure this out. And then there was a vague post on the messaging service Telegram reporting that security agents had taken someone from a steakhouse in Yekaterinburg with his hood up. And it didn't say that person was Evan, but somehow there was a feeling in your stomach that this could be him.
I'm imagining you guys at some restaurant, both with your cell phones out, tapping and tapping and tapping as you realized what was going on. Is that what it was like?
Yeah, and just a bit, on a personal level, I describe it as I felt like I was in a fever that night. It's hard to sleep. You kind of like my limbs quite literally felt like hot. Like I felt like I had almost like a fever, just kind of being unable to sleep, thinking about, at that moment, where is he?
I know you've reported on the prison where Evan's being detained. Can you tell me more about that place?
Yeah. He's in Lefortovo prison. It's a Tsarist-era prison, but it's really famous from the Stalin era, when the executions of purged officials would take place in the basement.
So it has a history.
Absolutely. These days, it's kind of most famous for its isolation. It's a prison where you can, you spend a very long time without ever seeing another prisoner or even hearing another prisoner.
Everyone's in solitary?
Everyone is in solitary. No, at some point you might be given a cellmate, but if you're given a cellmate, that's the only other person except for a prison warden that you would see. Trevor Reed, who was a U.S. Marine Corps veteran, who was in 6 prisons in Russia, described it as the most sinister. You just couldn't hear or see anyone. When they move you in the prison, what they do is they clink metal together, either their keys or they have these they snap their fingers sometimes. And that basically what that does is warn all the other prisoner guards, if there are any prisoners in the hallway, put them away now. Because the idea is when you're being escorted from your cell to be interrogated, you should not see any other prisoner. You should be isolated. Totally isolated. Not even a quick glance, like eye contact, that might be kind of fortifying for someone who's in that position.
Wow. I mean, that's a way to break someone down.
Yeah.
How many journalists like Evan are left in Russia? Like Americans reporting from inside the country?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know the exact latest toll. But I mean, the Wall Street Journal has pulled its Russia bureau chief out of the country. We're not the only ones. That sort of thin window into what was happening in Russia is really, really closing.
There's been this speculation, and I know you don't want to talk about it in great depth, that Russia might be angling for some kind of prisoner swap here. And many listeners will, of course, remember basketball star Brittany Griner, who was recently freed in exchange for arms dealer Victor Bout. But reading the reporting a little bit, what struck me is that it seems like it's Russia's policy not to trade anyone until they're convicted, which would mean this story could be going on for a very long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He had a bail hearing where he was basically, denied bail. And they upheld his detention. And, the Journal had offered up a bail, a pretty considerable bail, and it was rejected. The court rejected that.
How long do you think you're going to be able to continue reporting on your friend?
I mean, as a person, I can't imagine what would make me stop,
Yeah. You want to close the bar down with him again soon, I can tell.
I would love that. Actually, it's funny. He's reading Life and Fate according to this Russian prison monitor. So if that guy's lying, he owes me a lot of time because I'm now reading Life and Fate because I thought, well, I should have something to relate with Evan about.
You're reading the same book he's reading. What's Life and Fate?
Okay, but this is the thing. It's like 800 pages long. I didn't know that. I heard, it's a novel about World War II. I thought, all right, 300 pages. I've got time for that. It's 800 pages, Mary. So it's fantastic. It's an amazing book. I can't wait to talk to him about it. I'm sure it must be. I'm like, part of me is like surprised that they let you read that in a Russian prison because it's incredibly critical of authoritarianism. Yeah, I'm about 100 pages into it. I'm going to guess he's deeper into the book than I am. But so things like that. It's nice to kind of feel some connection to, your colleague, even though he's on the other side of this wall.
You still sound kind of shocked. This is all happening.
Yeah. What makes you say that?
It's just something about your voice. Like, I can hear you processing it in real time.
Yeah. It's hard to imagine. I've talked to, I can't count how many people who've been in the Fortovo prison. And so, at this point, I have a sense of how the prison works. We got some to go on Google Maps and, basically identify this is where this happens, this is where the interrogations happen. But that's all abstract and it's journalistic. And when you stop to think, this is somebody that in a normal time I'd be reporting the story with, who's in there. Yeah, it is a bit surreal.
Drew, I'm really grateful for your time and for your reporting. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Drew Hinshaw is a senior world reporter at the Wall Street Journal. And that's the show. If you're a fan of what we're doing here at What Next, the best way to support us, show us a little love, is to join our membership program. It's known as Slate Plus. Go on over to slate.com/whatnextplus to find out all about it. What Next is produced by Elena Schwartz, Anna Phillips, Paige Osborne, Madeline Ducharme, and now Rob Gunther. We're getting a little help from Laura Spencer. We are led by Alicia Montgomery with a little boost from Susan Matthews. Ben Richmond is our Senior Director of Podcast Operations at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. Go track me down on Twitter, say hello. I'm at Mary's desk. All right, I'll catch you back here tomorrow.